Some players are still in their prime in their late 30s. Modric is still starting games at 39. Thiago Silva was still captaining Fluminense at 40. Messi will be 39 by the time football decides he's actually done. But not every career works that way. These five barely got 2 or 3 years. One of them, the best player on the planet before he turned 22, never got close again. Another had a season so good an entire rival stadium stood up and applauded him for it.
It is very, very, very rare that usually Real Madrid fans applaud an opposition player.
And one of them lost his prime not once, but twice, and still somehow ended up lifting the World Cup. This is the part of football nobody really talks about, not the legends who lasted, the ones who didn't get the time to. Barcelona's biggest rivals just watched him destroy their team, and they stood up and applauded him for it. November 19th, 2005, the Bernabeu. Ronaldinho scores twice against Real Madrid, and after the second goal, 80,000 rival fans rise to their feet. It had only happened once before, for one other Barcelona player, Diego Maradona. Ronaldinho didn't even notice it happening. "I found out when we got to the dressing room," he said. "Everyone was talking about it, so I went to check it on TV." Between 2004 and 2006, he won World Player of the Year twice and the Ballon d'Or, 94 goals for Barcelona, 11 in just 12 El Clasicos. He wasn't just good, he made defenders look like they were playing a different sport. Then, almost as fast as it arrived, it started slipping. Injuries genuinely disrupted his final season at Barcelona. That part is real, not an excuse. But it wasn't the only thing happening. Reports of his nightlife had started following him for years. At one point, the club reportedly blamed his missed training on gastroenteritis, an excuse they eventually stopped using. Then, in 2008, Pep Guardiola took over as manager. Guardiola was building a team on discipline and system, not freedom and flair, and there was a young academy player he was building the whole project around. Guardiola feared Ronaldinho's hard-partying ways were setting a bad example for a young and impressionable Messi, reporting at the time said. Within months, Ronaldinho was sold to AC Milan. Years later, Ronaldinho told a different version. "My exit from Barcelona was my decision, not Guardiola's," he said, insisting he'd already achieved what he wanted at the club and needed a change. Maybe it really was mutual. Maybe the club needed him gone before he even decided to leave. Either way, the outcome was the same. The player who once made a rival stadium stand and applaud him was gone from Barcelona within 2 years of that ovation. He won football's biggest individual award, and by his own admission, he'd already started declining 2 years before he got it. "I won that in decline," Owen said, looking back at his 2001 Ballon d'Or. "I snapped my hamstring in two when I was 19. Before that injury, at just 18, Owen scored one of the most famous goals in World Cup history, running the length of the pitch past 3 Argentina defenders in 1998. From the age of 10, he says, there was no one better than him in the world. Then came the hamstring tear at Elland Road in 1999. Back then, surgeons didn't operate on it. They just let it reattach and hoped for the best. Owen played the rest of his career with 2 hamstring muscles in one leg instead of 3. He still won the Ballon d'Or 2 years later. He still scored a perfect hat-trick against Germany in 2001. Right foot, left foot, header. But by his own account, the player who did those things was already running at a fraction of what he used to be. "I still didn't know injuries would compromise me so much," he said. "But looking back, even then, I was terrified to run at top speed." A big money move to Real Madrid in 2004 should have been the next chapter of a legendary career. Instead, it was where the injuries caught up completely. A single season, unable to displace Raul and Ronaldo up front before a return to England that never recaptured what he'd lost. Michael Owen didn't have a short prime because he lacked what it takes. He had a short prime because the injury that ended it happened before most players even start. He was called Brazil's next great striker, the 6'2", explosive two-footed forward who could score from any angle. Between 2003 and 2005, Adriano scored 49 goals in just 73 games for Parma and Inter Milan, a strike rate most forwards never touch, even for a single season, let alone 2 in a row. He was just as dangerous for Brazil. 19 goals in 23 appearances, including 2 braces at the 2005 Confederations Cup, one against Germany, one against Argentina, as he walked away with both the Golden Boot and the Golden Ball. At his best, defenders simply couldn't handle him. He had the frame of a heavyweight and the touch of a playmaker. And for 2 years, there was a real argument he was the best striker alive. Then one phone call ended it. August 2004. Adriano was in Milan when he learns his father, Almir, has died of a heart attack back home in Brazil. After that day, my love for football was never the same, he later said. I was across the ocean, away from my family, and I just couldn't cope with it. What followed wasn't a single setback, it was a slow collapse. One thing feeding into the next. The grief turned into depression. The depression turned into alcohol. I only felt happy when I was drinking, Adriano admitted years later. I drank everything I could get my hands on. I didn't stop, and in the end, I had to leave Inter. He would show up to training still drunk, and Inter, rather than expose him, covered for it, telling the press he was carrying a muscle injury when the real problem was something no one wanted to say publicly. His teammate, Javier Zanetti, remembered the exact moment it started. When he got the phone call from Brazil, "Adri, Dad is dead." I saw him in his room. He threw the phone and started screaming. You couldn't imagine that scream. We did not succeed in pulling him out of depression. That's perhaps the biggest defeat of a whole career. It still hurts me. I was so powerless. Adriano's prime wasn't cut short by a rival, a tactic, or even his own choices. Not really. It ended with a phone call he never asked for, and a version of himself that never came back the same. Liverpool fans nicknamed him El Niño. For 3 years, he was one of the most feared strikers on the planet, and Chelsea paid £50 million to find out he wasn't anymore. Torres broke through at Atletico Madrid as a teenager, becoming a club legend before he'd even left his youth years behind. But it was Liverpool, from 2007, where he became a genuine world-class name. Pace, power, and finishing that terrorised defences across Europe. He scored 65 goals in 102 Premier League appearances, was Liverpool's fastest player ever to reach 50 league goals, and finished third for the Ballon d'Or in 2008, behind only Cristiano Ronaldo and Lionel Messi. Then, starting in the 2008 to 2009 season, his body began breaking down. Hamstring injuries, ankle problems, knee damage. Not one setback, a chain of them, over 2 straight years, that never gave him a real chance to recover. His own former teammate Jamie Carragher explained it years later. "We knew Chelsea did not sign the player they thought," he said. "They bought a striker who at 26 had already played 468 games, hadn't had a summer off in 3 years, and was constantly trying to repair his body. Chelsea paid the British transfer record anyway, £50 million in January 2011, for a version of Torres that had already quietly disappeared. What followed was one of the most infamous drop-offs in Premier League history. In one stretch during his first full season, Torres went over 1,080 minutes without scoring a single goal. He finished his Chelsea career with just 45 goals in 172 appearances, compared to 81 goals in 142 games at Liverpool. The pace never came back, neither did the confidence. Fernando Torres didn't lose his talent overnight, and he didn't lose it to one bad decision. He lost it to a body that had already been asked for too much. Ronaldo Nazario. Hours before the biggest game of his life, something happened to him that nobody could fully explain. 4 years later, he scored twice in the final that made it not matter anymore. By 1998, Ronaldo was already the best striker on the planet. 5 goals at that World Cup, including a stunning solo finish against Holland in the semi-final, carrying Brazil to the final against France. Then, the night before the final, he suffered a seizure. He was rushed to hospital. Brazil's official team sheet, without him, was submitted, and then resubmitted with him reinstated, just 70 minutes before kickoff, after he insisted he could play.
He played. Brazil lost 3-0. To this day, what actually happened in that hotel room isn't fully known outside a small circle of people who were there. The mental health of athletes was not considered then, Ronaldo said, looking back years later. What followed was worse. In November 1999, his knee tendon partially tore playing for Inter Milan. He came back 5 months later, and in his very first game back, in the Coppa Italia final, the same tendon ruptured completely. He was on the pitch for 6 minutes. His own physiotherapist called it the worst injury he'd ever seen in football. Ronaldo missed the entire following season. 17 months without competitive football, most of it spent in rehab sessions that reportedly ran 9 or 10 hours a day. The specialists at Milan's own fitness lab weren't confident he'd ever come back at all. Then came 2002. Ronaldo didn't just return. He carried Brazil to the World Cup final again, scoring 7 goals across the tournament, including 2 in the final itself as Brazil beat Germany 2-0. "We lost the World Cup," he said, reflecting on 1998, "but I won another cup, my life." Every other player on this list lost their prime and never got it back. Ronaldo lost his twice, to a mystery nobody's ever fully explained, and to an injury that was supposed to end his career outright. And both times, he found a way to walk back onto the biggest stage in the sport and prove it wasn't over.